All right, welcome. Comparing the preseason rankings I had of each division compared to the final standings of the season. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how I did. I'm not usually as accurate as I was this year. With that being said, there are some pretty major flops I took a gamble on and they didn't pay off. So let's dive into it. Preseason rankings in red. This is just the Eastern Conference because I have limited board space and editing the videos tends to screw up the videos anyway. So I'm just going to do this in a two-part series, so whatever. Um, I had the Leafs in first place, winning the division. I going it, looking back, I probably still would have had the Leafs in first. I don't think that was a crazy decision. They end up in third, struggle behind with the goaltending a bit. Nonetheless, pretty solid season from the Leafs. Biggest flub I had was the Sabres in number two. I was high on the Sabres. They just missed the playoffs last year. I figured if they just figure out how to get their team defense to work, combined with that offense, they figure out how to transition defense to offense like they showed last year they could do. I thought they were going to be an absolute powerhouse this year. Not the case. They couldn't figure out how to transition their defense to offense. They tried to play defense. It resulted in no offense. They tried to play offense, and then the offense has dried up. And I don't know. But there are bright spots. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, solid goaltender. But yeah, last time I picked the Sabres to make the playoffs, they finished last in the division. This year they finished sixth in the division, which isn't great. Uh, so I'm just not going to pick the Sabres to make the playoffs until eventually when they do, I'll pick them potentially the season after. So this is the second or third time I picked the Sabres to make the playoffs in the past decade, and they haven't. So third place, I had the Tampa Bay Lightning. Um, yep. Fourth place, I had the Bruins. Thought they were going to take a step back with Krejci and Bergeron out of the lineup, and they did. But it wasn't as big of a step as we thought. Guys like Zaka and Coyle both stepped up in huge ways. They also had some depth pieces like Danton Heinen coming in and putting up something close to 20 goals. You have Justin Brazeau coming in late on an entry level contract, undrafted. So you've had Lorai come up, you've had Waterspoon step in and be a normal in the lineup. So you've had kind of unexpected successes, which I think has bode well for the Bruins. Florida, I had in fifth. I had a lot of questions. They lost some offensive pieces like Anthony Duclair in the offseason. They were not going to have some guys on defense. They're going to have Kulikov start on defense. I was not high on Kulikov. He's exceeded my expectations, but I had very low expectations for him. So I wasn't too high on Florida, but they showed they're an absolute powerhouse. Six, Ottawa. Again, Ottawa is a team that needs to figure out how to get their team defense in order to be a successful playoff team. I had them the first team missing the playoffs. I thought they were going to take a step in the right direction. Some of these younger guys develop a little more, become a little more dangerous, and that didn't necessarily happen. Detroit in seventh. I wasn't really high on Detroit. I didn't think Detroit or Ottawa were going to be bad. I thought they were both going to be kind of competing for a wild card spot. Needless to say, that didn't really happen. Detroit did right up until the end, but Ottawa did not. Detroit, I think they could make the playoffs next year, but I still have a lot of questions. A lot of their goal scorers, their top goal scorers, like David Perron, unrestricted free agent, Patrick Kane. Was he going to fall off at some point? You can't rely on Patrick Kane to get you a point per game. They have some young, exciting rookies that should be coming in, I would assume, this upcoming season. Hopefully, to start the season, some of these guys are a little overdue to come up, in my opinion. But we'll see with Detroit. But just missing the playoffs is pretty accurate. And Montreal in last. I like what they're doing. They're taking right steps. I don't think it's a bad thing for Montreal to be in last. Build up that prospect pool a little more. Montreal did finish last. In comparison to the current standings, Florida way exceeded my expectations, up 5. Still made the playoffs, which I predicted. The only team I predicted to make the playoffs that did not was the Buffalo Sabres in the Atlantic. Bruins, Leafs, Bolts. Sounds about right in whatever order you decide. Bolts, didn't really see them being in the top 2 in the Atlantic. I also had the Sabres ahead of the Tampa Bay Lightning, but nonetheless, Tampa Bay slots in that 3-4 position pretty nicely in the Atlantic. Detroit just missing the playoffs. Buffalo kind of a late season run, but it wasn't super close. Ottawa and Montreal missing it pretty badly, but I like what Montreal's doing. I do. I don't think they'll make the playoffs next year, but I think the following season they could start to be a real threat. We'll see how they manage their young defensemen and how they manage their roster moves. They have a lot of young NHL ready prospects. Some of which saw time in the OHL this year, or the Canadian Hockey League. I think QJMHL was one. There was another league somebody was playing in that I don't think it was really all that necessary to have them go back for another year. You put up 100 points in the Canadian Hockey League. You go back, you score 150. Is that really helping your development? I got questions. So. Montreal's going to have to figure out what young guys stay and go because there are so many roster spots, and they have more guys that are ready for a roster spot than they have willing to give out. All right, I guess that's the Atlantic. Let me know if you have any questions with that. Aside from the Sabres, I did pretty well. I had 5 teams. I couldn't see Florida missing the playoffs. That's why I had 5 teams. Sabres were kind of the odd guy out, but I thought they were going to be better, and they weren't. So going on to the Metro, first one on the board, New Jersey. We all know that didn't work out well at all, and there are a ton of reasons. The defense was not playing up to par. The goaltending, and I hate to harp on goaltenders, but they were just not good. Letting in a lot of easy goals. Dougie Hamilton goes down for a majority of the season. Some of the offensive production wasn't really there. You had injuries to Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, which really shouldn't be a surprise. Both of those guys get injured on a regular basis, but nonetheless, that does hurt their scoring. And as a result, we've kind of seen this team crumble to a point where they had to fire their coach. And now they have Travis Green as coach. So it's been interesting so far. We'll see how he continues to do. I think he's an interim coach, so we'll see if he is there next season. Interesting. But New Jersey, nonetheless, gone. I remember saying New Jersey, New York, Carolina, the top 3 teams could vouch for that number 1 spot. I think they're all pretty similar in what they could do. But I had questions about each one. The Rangers and the Hurricanes did not disappoint because they finished 1 and 2 in the final standings. The Rangers, absolute powerhouse of a team. Carolina, not too shabby either. They did pretty solid. They only finished 3 points behind the Rangers. Rangers, slightly better offense. Carolina, slightly better defense, if you will. Both are 7-3 in their last 10 games. Pretty similar. Different styles of play, but I think it's a solid matchup nonetheless. New York Islanders kind of came in hot since Patrick Waugh took over as coach. They weren't in the playoffs when he took over, and all of a sudden now they're kind of in the 3rd seed, but also not too far out from missing the playoffs. 3 points out from missing the playoffs. So take that 3 with a grain of salt. Right? If this was a 1-8 conference thing, they would be the first wildcard team. I didn't even factor that into my playoff format video. That's kind of an error. Oops. Anyway, too late now, right? So New York Islanders and the Capitals sneak in with a goal differential of -37, which I believe is the worst goal differential the NHL has had in a 30-plus league or a 30-plus team league in the playoffs. So yeah. Where was I? So you have 4 teams as opposed to 3. New York Islanders, I thought were going to be good. They're always pretty good. They're always, a fringe playoff team, as they were this year. This year they were just above the lines, but I had them just below the line. I thought Florida was going to edge out the Islanders. Turns out Florida did edge out the Islanders this year, but they both made the playoffs, so it didn't really matter. Columbus, I thought, was going to take a big step forward. They acquired some pretty solid pieces. Remember they got Provorov and Severson. And that was a little bit of a head scratcher, but they also have guys coming up like Juracek. They have a pretty solid young core. Was Kent Johnson going to bounce back? How are these rookies? How is Chinikov going to do? How is Voronkov going to do? Right. So I was pretty high on them. Not to a point where I had them vouching for a wild card position. I didn't think they were that close, but nonetheless, I thought they were going to be a lot better than they were last year. Adam Fantilli, playing college hockey should be pretty NHL ready. Showed this year it's still a work in progress to get to that NHL level. But he's going to be a solid guy for years to come. Johnny Gaudreau taking a big step back. Patrick Laine drama this year. So it didn't quite work out for Columbus. They're in dead last. And looking back at it, it's about right. They should be in last place, considering how the seasons went. Pittsburgh I had in 6th place. I was not high on the Erik Karlsson deal. I'm still not very high on it. He's an offensive defenseman, but we've seen him lapse defensively in his own zone. Now, I like Erik Karlsson. I think he's a great guy. I think he's incredibly talented on the ice. But when it comes to defense, he needs a very strong defensive partner, which Pittsburgh has paired him up with. But there are still defensive lapses in Karlsson's game that sometimes come back to bite you. So Pittsburgh, just missing the playoffs this year. I had them maybe like 10 points less than where they actually finished. What'd they have? They had 88 points, so I had them around like 81, 82 at most. So I guess it's not too far off, but, lower playoff bar this year for the wild card teams, which is fine. It doesn't. If you're in the playoffs, you're in the playoffs. Doesn't matter how many points you get at the end of the year. You're in the playoffs, so you have a chance at the Stanley Cup. That's what matters, not necessarily your points, but if you make it to the playoffs. Who else? Washington. Looking at Washington on paper going into this year, it was atrocious. I debated putting them in last place. But you have Ovechkin. You have kind of key guys that are coming back. I thought they were slightly better than Philadelphia on paper. Now, Washington, Philadelphia, I think both have teams where you could really make an argument for either coach being a Jack Adams finalist for Coach of the Year. The Washington Capitals, where they started the season off, was absolutely horrendous. They looked awful. They couldn't defend. They couldn't score. Darcy Kemper lost the starting job, but Charlie Lindgren didn't look much better in net at the same time at the beginning of the season. There are a lot of questions. That team has really evolved. They learned how to play defense, then they learned how to play team defense, and now they're learning how to transition that defense to offense. They have a physical brand of hockey. They're playing smart hockey. And guys are starting to take grasp of this new system, and it's starting to really produce some positive results. And I think we've seen that to a point where they made the playoffs this year. I had them in 7th, and if you look at their roster as is, I would still pick them to be in 7th if I haven't watched any of their games. So you got to give credit to Spencer Carberry, coach of the Capitals. Same with John Tortorella, though. They were in a playoff. The Flyers were in a playoff position up until like a week ago, where they absolutely fell apart, which is fine. I don't think you need to make the playoffs if you're Philly. You want to focus on the rebuild and doing it right, and focus on the long-term future. You don't want to accelerate this more than it has to be done. But John Tortorella gets the most out of his team every single year he's behind a bench. It's absolutely incredible. My question is, how long until the Tortorella effect begins to wear off in Philadelphia? I think we have one more year of it, and then it starts to wear off, and maybe Tortorella gets moved up in the organization and is taken out of that coaching position. Nonetheless, Philly finished in 6th. Washington finished in 4th. That's not too bad. Columbus dead last. New Jersey 7th. No surprise. If you've been following the NHL this season, that shouldn't be any surprise anyway. Pittsburgh jumps Philadelphia, which is nuts considering where they were like a month and a half ago in the standings. Washington. So that's the Eastern Conference. I'll do a Western Conference. Overall, there were some obvious like misses. Buffalo, obvious miss. New Jersey, obvious miss. Philadelphia, Columbus, obvious misses. Yeah, I guess those are the big ones. But overall, in terms of the predictions as to how a team would do, it was pretty close to accurate. Aside from a couple teams, which happens, I make it a point to say at the beginning of every year, my preseason predictions are never correct, and this is proof of it. I think I did better than most years, but nonetheless, there were some pretty massive misses. Buffalo really standing out to me because they never were really close to making the playoffs. They had a bit of a run at the end of the season, but at the same time, it wasn't like there wasn't a whole lot of hope that Buffalo could do it, and it proved right. So surprises, I don't know. Well, I got my Rangers jersey on because they won the President's Trophy, best team, not just in the East but in the NHL. I got my Bruins hat because they were pleasantly surprising this year. I still don't know how they finished in second in the Atlantic. In all honesty, I'm a Bruins fan. It's awesome. It's exciting, but at the same time, I don't know if they are that dominant. I think they finished seventh in the NHL, so we'll see what happens in the playoffs. They almost won the division over Florida. Whoop, that's my chair. I don't know if that would have been appropriate, but all right, let's. I'm going to talk about the Western Conference next. Appreciate you guys watching. Take care, right?